Someone underestimated you today. Maybe it was subtle. Maybe they talked over you in a meeting like your ideas were background noise. Maybe they gave you that look, the one that says they've already decided you're not a threat. Maybe they took credit for something you built, assuming you'd be too nice to call them out. And you smiled. You stayed calm. You let it slide. And they think that means they won. They think your composure is compliance. Your patience is permission. Your kindness is weakness. They have no idea that you're not reacting because you're too soft to fight back. You're not reacting because you're playing a completely different game. You're building something they can't see yet. Something that will make every dismissal, every underestimation, every moment they treated you like you didn't matter feel like the mistake it was. You're not weak. You're just strategic. And there's a particular kind of satisfaction in knowing that while they're celebrating small wins at your expense, you're constructing something they'll have to acknowledge whether they want to or not. This really crystallized for me about a year ago. I was in a work situation where I'd been consistently overlooked. Not in dramatic ways. Just in that steady, grinding way where your contributions get minimized, your ideas get attributed to other people, and somehow you're always just outside the circle of people who get recognized. There was this one person in particular. I'll call him Dan. Dan had this way of dismissing everything I said with this slight smirk, like he was being patient with someone who didn't quite get how things worked. In meetings, he'd let me finish talking and then immediately pivot to someone else's idea. Or he'd reframe what I'd said in his own words and suddenly it would be taken seriously. Like my thoughts only mattered once they'd been filtered through him. And the frustrating part was that I couldn't point to anything specific. He wasn't openly rude. He wasn't aggressive. He just consistently acted like I was someone who didn't need to be taken seriously. Someone whose presence was tolerated but not valued. I remember this one particular project. I'd put together this proposal, spent weeks on it, mapped out every detail. And when I presented it in a meeting, Dan spent the whole time on his phone. Barely looked up. And when I finished, he just nodded vaguely and said something about how we'd need to circle back to it. Dismissed. 2 weeks later, he presented almost the same concept. Different language, but the core ideas were identical. And suddenly everyone was excited about it. Suddenly it was innovative and worth pursuing. And I sat there watching this happen, feeling my face get hot, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. And I had this moment where I wanted to call him out. Wanted to say loudly and clearly that he'd just stolen my work. Wanted to make everyone in that room see what he'd done. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I kept my face neutral. I let him have his moment. And afterward, a colleague pulled me aside. Asked if I'd noticed that Dan had basically presented my proposal. Asked if I was okay. And I could see in their face that they expected me to be angry. Expected me to be planning some kind of confrontation. But I just said it was fine. That I was glad the concept was getting traction, regardless of who was presenting it. And I could see them looking at me like I was being naive. Like I was letting myself get walked over. Like my kindness was proof that I didn't have the edge to succeed in this environment. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't being kind in that moment. I was making a calculation. Because confronting Dan would have made me look petty. Would have turned into a he said she said situation where I came off as someone who couldn't handle collaboration. Would have given him the opportunity to twist it into me being unable to share credit or work as part of a team. But staying quiet? Staying calm and collected and above it? That protected my reputation while he was building one as someone who needed to steal ideas to contribute. And more importantly, it gave me information. It showed me exactly who he was. Exactly what he was willing to do. Exactly how seriously I should take him as competition. I started watching more carefully after that. And I realized Dan wasn't just doing this to me. He had a whole pattern of taking credit for other people's work. Of positioning himself as the source of good ideas while systematically minimizing the actual sources. And he'd gotten away with it for years because people either didn't notice or didn't want to cause conflict by calling it out. But I noticed something else too. Dan was good at taking credit. He wasn't particularly good at execution. He could repackage ideas, but he couldn't build on them. He could present concepts, but he couldn't handle the complex implementation. He was essentially a middleman trying to pass himself off as an innovator. And that's when I shifted how I was approaching the whole situation, because I realized I'd been playing his game, trying to get recognition for my ideas in meetings, trying to be seen as valuable in the same ways he was being seen as valuable. But that game was rigged in favor of people like him. People who were comfortable taking up space, claiming ownership, making themselves visible. So I started playing a different game. I stopped trying to get credit in meetings, stopped trying to prove myself in those visible moments. Instead, I started building a body of work that was undeniable. Documentation of every project I'd worked on, records of contributions I'd made, a portfolio of outcomes that had my name attached in ways that couldn't be erased or reframed. And I started being very strategic about who I shared ideas with. Not out of paranoia, but out of recognition that some people were collaborators and some people were extractors. Dan was an extractor. So he got surface-level information, vague concepts, nothing he could steal that would actually matter. The real work, the valuable work, I protected. I built it quietly. I documented it carefully. I made sure there were timestamps and email trails and evidence of origin. And I kept being kind to Dan. Kept being professional and courteous and unruffled by his behavior. Because here's what I'd figured out. Getting angry would feel good in the moment but wouldn't change anything. Confronting him would create drama but wouldn't stop him. Fighting for credit in meetings would just make me look like I cared too much about recognition. But building something undeniable? Creating work that spoke for itself? Becoming so good at what I did that my contributions couldn't be stolen because they required skills he didn't have? That would change everything. That would be the statement that mattered. There were so many moments where I wanted to react. Where someone would make a comment about how I was too nice or too accommodating or not aggressive enough to get ahead. Where I'd see Dan getting praised for work that had my fingerprints all over it. Where I'd feel this burning in my chest that wanted to turn into words, into confrontation, into some kind of immediate justice. But I kept thinking about the long game. About where I wanted to be in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. And I knew that person, that future version of me, wouldn't get there by winning petty battles. She'd get there by being undeniable. By building skills and relationships and a reputation that was based on actual substance, not just visibility. So I stayed kind. Not because I was weak, but because I was patient. Not because I was naive, but because I understood something that Dan didn't. Stolen credit is hollow. It doesn't build real skill. It doesn't create actual value. It just creates the appearance of value, and that appearance only lasts until someone looks closely. And I was building something that would hold up under scrutiny. Something that couldn't be stolen or minimized or attributed to someone else. Something that would make it very clear who was actually creating value and who was just good at taking credit for it. Maybe you're in this situation right now. Maybe someone is consistently underestimating you, dismissing you, taking advantage of your kindness. Maybe people around you are telling you to be more aggressive, more confrontational, more willing to fight for what's yours. Maybe you're starting to wonder if staying calm means you're letting yourself get walked over. Here's what I need you to understand. There's a difference between being weak and being strategic. Between being naive and being patient. Between letting things go because you can't handle conflict and letting things go because you're focused on something bigger. Weakness is when you don't respond because you don't know how. Strategy is when you don't respond because you know a better move. Weakness is when you let things slide because you're afraid of confrontation. Strategy is when you let things slide because confrontation would cost you more than it would gain you. And the people who mistake your kindness for weakness? They're revealing something about themselves. They're showing you that they can't imagine any motivation for restraint other than inability. That they can't conceive of someone choosing not to retaliate because they're playing a longer game. That they assume everyone operates on the same timeline of instant gratification and immediate revenge. But you're not playing that game. You're not measuring success by who wins today's argument or this week's competition for credit. You're measuring success by who you're becoming, what you're building, where you'll be when all these small battles are forgotten. And there's something deeply satisfying about that. About knowing that while they're congratulating themselves for small victories at your expense, you're constructing something they can't even see yet. You're developing skills, building relationships, creating value, becoming someone whose success will be so obvious that it won't need to be defended or explained. The hard part is that this satisfaction is private. You can't share it because it would sound like either weakness or delusion. If you try to explain that you're not reacting because you're being strategic, people hear excuses. If you say you're focused on the long game, they hear you rationalizing inaction. If you mention that you're building towards something bigger, they hear fantasy. So you carry it alone. This knowledge that their underestimation is temporary, that their dismissal is based on incomplete information, that their confidence in their own superiority is going to age poorly. You carry it quietly while they're loud. You carry it patiently while they're celebrating. And some days that feels powerful, like you have a secret they don't know, like you understand something about how success actually works that they've missed, like you're the only one who can see where this is really going. Other days it feels lonely, like maybe they're right and you're wrong, like maybe kindness really is weakness in environments like this. Like maybe you should be more aggressive, more willing to fight, more focused on immediate wins. Like maybe strategic patience is just a story you're telling yourself to feel better about not standing up for yourself. And nobody tells you how to navigate that doubt. How to maintain confidence in your approach when everyone around you is suggesting a different one. How to stay kind when kindness gets taken advantage of. How to remain patient when patience looks like passivity. How to keep building quietly when quiet looks like absent. The truth is that revenge success, real revenge success, requires a kind of discipline that immediate retaliation doesn't. Immediate retaliation is emotionally satisfying. It's clear and concrete. You push back, you stand up for yourself, you make your point. There's a release in that, a sense of having done something. But revenge success is delayed gratification. It's showing up every day to build something while people are underestimating you. It's staying focused on your own development while others are focused on taking credit. It's being kind to people who don't deserve your kindness because you understand that their behavior reveals their character while your response reveals yours. And the discipline that requires is significant, because you don't get immediate payoff. You don't get to see people realize they were wrong about you in real time. You don't get the satisfaction of pointing out that they underestimated you. You just keep building, keep developing, keep moving forward. And you have to trust that eventually the work will speak for itself. But here's the thing about that kind of success. When it comes, it's complete. It's not just winning one argument or getting credit for one idea. It's becoming someone whose competence is so obvious that past dismissals look ridiculous in retrospect. It's reaching a level where you don't have to defend yourself because your work defends you. It's getting to a place where the people who underestimated you have to either acknowledge they were wrong or look foolish for continuing to dismiss you. That's more satisfying than any immediate revenge could be. Not because you're rubbing it in their faces, but because you don't have to. Because the evidence is so clear that it speaks for itself. Because their underestimation has become obviously incorrect without you having to point it out. So here's what happened with Dan. About 6 months after he presented my proposal as his own, I was offered a position leading a new initiative. It was a significant step up. More responsibility, more visibility, more opportunity to actually shape things. And it came with the ability to choose my own team. Dan applied to be part of it. Sent me this email about how he thought we'd work well together, how he had experience with these kinds of projects, how he was excited about the direction I was planning to take things. And I had this moment of pure vindication. This feeling of, now you want to work with me? Now you're recognizing my value? Now that I have something you want? And I was ready to decline him. Ready to keep him out of something he'd probably try to take credit for. Ready to demonstrate that his past behavior had consequences. It felt like the perfect revenge. Like the moment where I could finally show him that underestimating me had been a mistake. But then I did something that surprised me. I approved his application. I brought him onto the team. And I watched people's reactions, could see them wondering if I was being naive again. If I was setting myself up to be taken advantage of. If I'd learned nothing from the previous experience. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't forgiven him. I hadn't forgotten what he'd done. I just recognized something more important. Dan was actually pretty good at the surface level stuff. The presentations, the client-facing work, the making things look good part. And I needed someone who could do that work. Someone who could handle the parts of the project I didn't want to spend my time on. And more importantly, I was in a position now where he couldn't steal credit. Where the structure was clear and the roles were defined and the outcomes were going to be attributed accurately because I was the one setting that up. He could be useful without being dangerous. And I could use his skills while protecting myself from his patterns. But here's the thing that really shifted my perspective. Working with him more closely, I started seeing something I'd missed before. Dan wasn't just someone who stole credit. He was someone who was fundamentally insecure. Someone who'd built his entire professional identity around appearing valuable rather than being valuable. Someone who couldn't distinguish between his reputation and his actual skills because he'd spent so long cultivating one at the expense of the other. And watching that up close, I stopped feeling angry at him. I started feeling something closer to pity, because he was trapped in this pattern. He couldn't stop trying to take credit for other people's work because he didn't trust that his own work was good enough. He couldn't collaborate genuinely because he saw every interaction as zero-sum. He couldn't build real skills because he was too busy managing appearances. The revenge I'd been loading, the success I'd been building to prove him wrong, he couldn't even appreciate it when it happened. Because recognizing my competence would require acknowledging his own insecurity. Seeing my success would require admitting he'd been wrong to dismiss me. And he wasn't capable of that kind of honest self-reflection. So my success wasn't revenge against him. It was just my trajectory, my growth, my development. And his underestimation wasn't something I needed to prove wrong to him specifically. It was just something that became obviously incorrect to everyone, including him, whether he could admit it or not. And I realized something that completely reframed how I'd been thinking about all of this. I'd been treating kindness as strategy, as something I was doing because it served my long-term goals better than aggression would. And that was true. But it was also incomplete. Because somewhere in the process of being kind strategically, I'd actually become kinder. Not in a naive way, but in a way that was grounded in understanding. I could see people's insecurities and patterns. I could recognize when someone was acting out of fear or inadequacy. I could distinguish between people who were genuinely harmful and people who were just managing their own limitations badly. And that understanding made me less interested in revenge. Not because I'd become soft or forgiving in some artificial way. But because I developed enough confidence in my own trajectory that other people's underestimation didn't threaten me anymore. It was just information about them, not a statement about me. The revenge success I'd been building wasn't actually about them. It was about me. About becoming someone I respected. About developing skills I was proud of. About creating work that mattered. Their underestimation was just static in the background. Something that had motivated me initially but had become irrelevant once I found actual purpose in what I was doing. So if you're being underestimated right now, if people are mistaking your kindness for weakness, if you're being told you need to be more aggressive or more willing to fight, I need you to hear this. You're not weak. You're not naive. You're not missing something that they understand better than you do. You're playing a different game. You're measuring success differently. You're building towards something that doesn't require their validation or acknowledgement. And that's not just okay, it's actually the stronger position. Because their need to immediately prove themselves, to constantly fight for recognition, to treat every interaction as a competition, that's exhausting. That's limiting. That's a way of operating that keeps them focused on winning small battles while missing the actual war. You're not missing the war. You're just fighting it differently. You're building capacity instead of burning bridges. You're developing skills instead of defending territory. You're becoming undeniable instead of trying to convince people you're valuable. And yes, that requires patience. Yes, that means letting some things slide that feel like they shouldn't slide. Yes, that means staying kind to people who don't necessarily deserve your kindness. But it also means you're becoming someone who isn't controlled by other people's underestimation. Someone who doesn't need to prove themselves because their work proves them. Someone who can be generous because they're secure enough not to see everything as a threat. Write me a comment about who's underestimating you right now. You don't have to name them. Just tell me what they're missing. What you're building while they're dismissing you. What they're going to eventually have to acknowledge whether they want to or not. And hit that like button if you've been called too nice, too soft, too accommodating. If people have mistaken your strategic patience for weakness. If you're being told you need to be more aggressive when really you just need to be more patient. Let's acknowledge that we're playing the long game while everyone else is focused on today's score. Tell me in the comments about a time when someone underestimated you and lived to regret it. Or if you're still in the building phase, tell me what you're working toward. What's the revenge success you're loading? What are you becoming while they're not paying attention? Because I think we need to talk more honestly about this. About how kindness can be strategic. About how patience can be powerful. About how the best revenge isn't immediate retaliation but becoming undeniably successful. About how you don't actually need people to acknowledge they were wrong about you, you just need to be right about yourself. Let's build a space here where we can admit that we're being underestimated and it hurts. Where we can be honest about wanting people to see our value. Where we can talk about revenge success without pretending we're above wanting it. But where we can also recognize that the real power isn't in proving them wrong, it's in becoming someone who doesn't need their validation. And if you know someone who's being dismissed or underestimated right now, someone who's being told they're too nice or too soft to succeed, send this to them. Not as permission to be passive, but as validation that strategic kindness is real. That patience can be powerful. That you can be kind and competent and building towards something significant all at the same time. Maybe the ultimate revenge isn't making them see they were wrong. Maybe it's becoming so secure in your own success that their underestimation stops mattering. Maybe it's getting to a place where you can look back and see that their dismissal was just noise, just distraction, just something that temporarily bothered you while you were busy becoming who you needed to be. Keep building. Keep being kind when kindness is strategic. Keep being patient when patience serves your goals. Keep loading that revenge success. Not because you need to prove them wrong, but because you deserve to prove yourself right. Because you're capable of more than they're seeing. Because underestimation from others doesn't have to become underestimation of yourself. And when the success comes, when the work speaks for itself, when their underestimation becomes obviously wrong, you won't need to say anything. You won't need to point it out. You won't need their acknowledgement. You'll just know. And that knowing, that quiet confidence in your own trajectory, that's worth more than any immediate revenge could ever be.